it's not live. We're live. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to go ahead and assume, I asked last time, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that the microphone is working and picking up everything. Somebody can just tell us if it's not working. All right. So I am Tobias Murphy for Murphy Music Academy. And this is, of course, my teaching assistant, Brian, also for Murphy Music Academy.
Indeed.
Except for the people you teach over at the university. But
right.
So anyway.
Brian Allen, mostly with Tobias Murphy at Murphy Music Academy.
All right, so last stream was mostly did because I wanted to introduce Brian and talk about, well, just have him talk about something, which in that case ended up being sort of more the subtleties of intonation. And now I want to go into, this is going to be primarily my topic. That went over so well, people asked us if we would do it again, so we're doing it again. My primary topic today is going to be something which is of utmost interest, especially if you're a teacher, but also especially if you're a student. So a lot of people have the experience of they start violin lessons, they get a few years down the road, and then they realize that there's a lot of holes in their playing, you could say. A lot of things they don't understand about technique that they feel they should understand. A lot of things that maybe they felt like they should have been, I guess, forced to practice and didn't. And so I'm going to talk about, okay, as a teacher, and also coming from the other side as having been a student, how are you supposed to take someone, and we'll just go from, for now, someone that's never played before, ideally someone young, but not always, but in any case, taking someone that has never played before and getting them to, I guess the ultimate goal would be to be some kind of professional level, but we'll start out with just, getting them to a, high level of playing. What is the ideal way to go about doing that from the beginning that doesn't leave holes in their playing? And I believe that every teacher should have a long-term plan like that in place, a codified plan that they can then, something that they do generally with every student, but then of course gets tailored and modified depending on what the particular student needs. And I'm going to go through with you what I think that should be, what I tend to do, and sort of things to look for, I guess, in a teacher, or if you are a teacher, hopefully these are things that can help you as well. So the first thing that is the most important when it comes to deciding, okay, how am I going to take someone from step 0 to, I don't know, the Bruch Violin Concerto, is, of course, having your goals. Okay, so what is my point? If I'm starting a little kid, a 5-year-old child in violin, okay, what are my goals? Is it my goal just to teach them every week and have fun? I suppose that's the goal of a lot of teachers, and I suppose there's not as much wrong with that. Or do I have a long-term goal for that person already, even if most likely they're never going to reach there? And I believe that as a serious teacher, you want to start out with a long-term goal. So for me, I'm just going to start out with my long-term goal, at least when I first start out with somebody, is that they are going to, is to be able within 8 to 10 years, have them essentially have the physical aspects of technique worked out. Okay, so there's two sides of violin playing. There's, of course, the physical side, all of the things that you have to train into your hands and motions and motor patterns and all that good stuff. And then, of course, there is the mental side. Now, the mental side is something that just has to come with experience, often comes with, it depends on the person. If the person is willing, if the student is willing to tinker around a lot, to mess around with what maybe works for them, because after a while, even if you have all of the right technical things learned, there's a lot of things that are personal that you just kind of have to work out yourself. And then there's a lot of, when it comes to performing, there's a lot of experimentation that has to go in psychologically. So that's a whole other side of things. But when it comes to the more predictable side, which is the physical side, my goal is to kind of get them to essentially, you could say, max out the what you can do physically on the instrument within 8 to 10 years. And ideally, I would say your goal is, let's just say, to get them playing major repertoire starting to play major repertoire well within that time, which I tend to see sort of as the benchmark. The first major concerto that you should probably start to play as a young student would be the Bruch Concerto. So let's just say we start somebody at the age of 5. The goal is to be able to get them to the Bruch Violin Concerto. I'm not putting that on a timeline, but that is the ultimate goal. So I'm going to start with that goal in mind. Okay. So now we're going to go through, okay, to get someone from here to there without have them getting to be playing Brook with a bunch of bad technique and difficulties, what do you need to do then? All right, so first off, you have to think about, okay, first off, what does a violinist need to know? Okay, so there's three aspects of knowledge in playing violin and probably any musical instrument. The first, and this is the most obvious and I think the most important, is physical knowledge. What are all of the basic motor patterns and things like that that need to be trained, physically trained into the student. The other side is general information, and sometimes depending on whether or not they had a music class in school, some people will already have this. This is things like understanding note reading, understanding rhythm, being able to hear pitch, also the introduction of repertoire, things like that. And then the third part, which I mentioned earlier, is focus and your mindset. And that's something that, again, it's not as easy quite to train. That's more of a psychological aspect of things. But there are aspects of it that you do kind of have to be concerned about, because some people have these things naturally. One of the things is, can the student hear music? And what I mean by that is, I have had experiences with, because let's just say you get two kids in, okay, let's see, they're both 7 years old or something like that. One of the kids already, if you played something for them, there are kids like this, even younger. If you just played a simple tune for them that they've never heard before, they'd be able to sing it back to you, okay? Those kids are going to have a lot easier time than the ones that cannot do that. And so that's actually something that you have to take into consideration for people when you're starting to teach them. Do they actually have an ear that allows them to immediately pick up on and understand music as a whole? I had a student that struggled with her for a very long time, and it's still a bit of a struggle, though she's gotten a lot better because we started doing this, where I realized, I was like, why? First off, she was stiff as a board. So getting the technical things, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, took a lot longer than I normally expect. But she wanted to do it. So, and that's the other thing. If you want to do it, you'll do it. So she persevered, and we got, all of the ducks in a row as far as the bow arm and the left hand and all that good stuff is concerned. But then she just had the hardest time, learning just any new piece. And somewhere along the line, I figured out that she wasn't understanding it in terms of listening to and learning music. She was understanding it in the terms of, okay, I have to move my bow this way this many times. It became like almost a mathematical equation or some kind of thing, or a memorization of just physical processes. I have to move my bow this way. I have to move this finger at this time, and that's how she thought about everything. And of course, doesn't take that long before music becomes too complicated to do that. So, and then of course, rhythm completely goes out the window in that case. And so we ended up just spending a lot of time just singing. Okay. And no, she could not carry a tune. She got better. Eventually she was able to, but at first, no, she could not carry a tune at all, but we just did it anyway. And we actually had her, interestingly enough, sing while she played. And something about doing that, even though, again, the notes that were coming out of her mouth did not match what was on the violin at all. There was like maybe a fourth of the difference or something. Eventually, though, they started to line up. She started to be able to hear. Someone that is like that, automatically, no matter if two people start at the same time, the kid that can hear a song and sing it back to you without, with you just playing, and the kid that can't, they're not starting at the same level. Okay? Even if they've both never touched an instrument before, they have no idea about music, they've never been taught about music. That is something that you have to take into consideration. Now, these two, that extreme of a student that I've only met that once, it can be taught. It just is going to be a lot slower, but that is something that you have to take into consideration. So that comes into sort of the focus and mindset. But now back to the most important thing, which is, and this is the thing where when people talk about holes that were left in their violin education or music education, this is where things are the most obvious. And this is physical knowledge, or you could just consider, I like to use, it's basically just technique. I like to use the term physical knowledge because I like to draw it all back to what you are doing with your body in the violin, and understanding that you actually do have to train your body to move in a certain way, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of care. okay? It is not a linear process. As the teacher, you do not just, okay, all right, we're going to first lesson, we're going to set everything up. Here's all your bow hold, here's your position. Okay, and then you just stack on top of that. You have to keep revisiting that for probably, 5 years maybe with someone, because it just takes that long for them, A, to understand it, and then B, for it to completely solidify to the point where they don't have to think about it anymore, which is ultimately the goal. So first things first, when you're working with somebody, you want to be thinking, of course, about setup. Now, this is the most obvious thing when I first start with someone, assuming they have never played before. And sometimes if they have, because they usually have to rework this, the first thing we talk about is how do you hold the instrument? And they need to understand why and how they hold the instrument. So, as many of you know, I do not use shoulder rest. I do use this when I'm playing anything seriously. However, I don't start any students out with this at all. So, sometimes I will, after a while, recommend that a student starts with gets a pad, but at first we just see how they can do with nothing. Most kids don't have super long necks, so that's usually not a problem. So we explain, okay, the first thing you want to do is you want to have a predictable pattern to which they can get the violin up into the right place. So for me, I found the best way is, of course, you teach them rest position, which is holding the violin like this. Make sure they don't do that. And then there's a couple ways you can do it. You can have them draw the violin up to here. We'll always want to make sure I like this to be hidden by the neck. If the violin's down here, that's actually much more insecure. There, the violin can fall down. So you want to find a place for the violin where it can sit. And this is actually very important for things going forward. And these are the things that you have to think about as a teacher. I need to make sure that I teach something to someone that is actually useful, that won't get in their way when they're playing, let's say, the Bruch concerto or something like that. So one of the most important things is that wherever you put the violin, it can sit there without you having to squeeze with the neck, okay? It's not going to fall down to the chest, all right? So you need to have the violin in a place. So that's one of the things we work on. Okay, is the violin in a place where it's not going to be it's going to be secure, where they can approach with something, with what I call a settled approach to playing, where everything just kind of sits in its place and you can just only move what is necessary. And you don't have to do any weird motions with your shoulder girdle or any kind of tension that often comes across here to play appropriately. The next thing that you want to work on, of course, so we get the violin in place, is then, of course, the shape of the hand and the shape of the wrist. Sorry, reading comments. You can read the comments this time. I read all the comments.
Sure.
You can even reply to them if you want to. All right. So is, of course, the shape of the hand and the wrist. What is most ideal? If you go and watch my most recent video, which is about the 5 fundamental rules of violin technique, you want to have a position that allows the simplest motion possible to get the job done. I talk a lot about what was called hand frame, sort of a general shape to the hand that you can rely on, that isn't moving all the time. And so that is the first thing that you work on. Okay, sometimes we just practice that. We want to make sure the fingers are nice and loose. So we just practice the child holding. Some kids do this and they just do this naturally. I had one student, there's a video somewhere of me freaking out because I was expecting to spend the rest half of the lesson teaching this. I just said, okay, we're going to move your hand because we did the practice here. We're going to move your hand to here. And then the hand immediately looked like this. Okay. So that kid is still my favorite student. It's this incredibly talented child. But you do often have to, we have to work out things. And you have to work out things, we want to be no tension. So you can have them tap the violin. You can have them just hold it gently. You can do a lot of things to make sure, because you want them ultimately to have very little tension, just hold the violin with no tension. The next thing, and this is the most difficult part, learning to hold the violin is easy, all right? The bow is a lot more difficult. Everything about the bow is a lot more subtle. The problems that come in the violin, if somebody's wrist comes in, that's obvious. Problems with the bow hold are not quite as obvious. Now, I favor the Franco-Belgian bow hold. I think it is the most natural to the shape of the hand. I've done this demonstration many times, but if I do this, there's your bow hold, okay? If you do, this is not quite, I suppose I could do that too, but that just doesn't feel quite as secure for me. Now, if somebody actually knew what they were doing in terms of teaching the Russian bow hold, then obviously it works if it's existed. But I generally prefer this. And so I have a step-by-step process. Okay, we want this. And the most important thing besides keeping the good bow hold, and when somebody first starts, for the first year and sometimes even beyond, I write down in my notes, check on the bow hold every day, every week. Okay, just to make sure that there isn't devolving into some bad form of the bow hold. Making sure this isn't a common problem, people's pinkies coming down here. So you just have to check up on that all the time to make sure that they have a functioning bow hold. And then the next most important thing, and this is something that you can spend a lot of time perfecting, and this is super important, and so often you see this being a problem in people that have been playing for years. I'm talking about people in conservatories. I'm talking about myself a few years ago. Moving only from the elbow. Okay, so first things first, I always make sure a student, even if they go on to moving other places, we will do sometimes for months, just at the beginning of every lesson, 5 minutes, practicing moving only from the elbow. I cannot begin to describe just how important this is, that you only move from here and you don't do this hustle here, okay? Having a reliable and straight bow path is, well, it relates to everything. Almost every technique derives from this motion. If you want to have good spiccato technique, again, I am thinking about what the student is going to be doing later down the line. If you want to have good spiccato technique, you need to have the energy coming from here. And it's much easier to have a big motion coming from the elbow than the little motion. And so that's something you want to start with, making sure that just becomes the default of what they do. So those are the main things that I start with someone. And then from there on, there's just a variety of exercises that I do that slowly mold the student into those good positions. And my approach to a new, I'm not going to say a young student, but a new student, is that basically I spend 3/4 of the lesson on technique, and then the last quarter of the lesson on whatever music they're playing. And usually at this point, they're not playing anything super long, anything super complicated. I do want people to be playing music. I don't want people to just be doing technique, unless sometimes people ask to do that. And so I kind of see those as two separate things. The technique is over here. We're working all these things out. I get very particular. And then the music is over here. And we slowly, as they get better with the technical exercises, we slowly start applying that to the music. And eventually it all kind of starts to coalesce together. So the first thing I do, besides after, of course, setting up someone and doing all of that, all of the preliminary exercises, making sure that that's what they have in place, is there's a variety of exercises. And this is kind of where, as a teacher, you need to have a system set up. Now, you can modify this, but you need to have a system set up where you can, a system set up that you know is going to work and is going to help people sort of, again, I like the idea of molding. It's kind of almost, it's a little bit slow. You can almost think of it like wind or water erosion, but there's going to be a process that's going to shape the student's body into movements that you want them to use and that they can rely on. So going back to the bow, I have a series of exercises that I call the bow hold gauntlet. Okay, and so far these exercises have not failed to develop someone's bow hand and bow arm at the most basic level and get it more reliable. So here, oh, wonderful. I'm about to talk about that, Iggy. All right, fantastic. Colle is fantastic. I'm going to get into that. That is part of the bow hold gauntlet. I do emphasize Colle. All right, so here's the thing. The spider, no, if somebody's looking at the notes, I don't do this. Somebody did this with me as a kid, and I just don't see the point in this. I really don't. So once somebody knows what their bow hold is supposed to look like, and they can grab the bow and at least hold it up to me, and it looks like this. Sometimes when they start playing, it starts to do other things. But so if it looks like this when they start, then the next thing we want to do is, okay, what are the functions of all of these fingers? All right, so because all the fingers have functions. So the thumb and the middle finger are what I call the fulcrum. So the fulcrum is a point on a lever in which the lever moves around, okay? So the thumb and the middle finger are the fulcrum. The weight of the bow has to shift from either the frog side or the tip side, depending on where you're playing. So one of the first things I start with somebody, and again, this is not something I generally do with a young child, okay? I have a simpler versions of all of these exercises I do with younger kids. When it comes to an older student, however, first things first, you find the balance point. And you make the fulcrum here, and you want to touch sort of about here with the middle finger, and then right across on the tip of the thumb with the pinky. And then you support the weight of the bow here, and then you leave these fingers off the bow. And then you proceed. Have you ever done this? You proceed to
I did. It was a long time ago.
push the bow up and down with. And what this does, first off, it teaches these two fingers how to work together. Because very often, sometimes you'll see people, the middle finger and thumb will not be across from each other. If they're not, they'll be down here or something like this. And this does not provide the proper weight distribution that this does. And also it teaches these two fingers to work together, because the relationship, these two fingers have to stay on the bow without like changing positions or moving, while the pinky is moving the bow around. And what this also does is that this teaches the pinky how to be strong and flexible in this position where it's close to the rest of the hand, because we want the fingers as close as they would naturally be to each other. People do this because their pinky is weak, and this is an easy way to hold up the bow. But now they have no flexibility. Here, I have control. But most people cannot start down here, so we start an inch below the balance point. And then every week, and this can sometimes, depending on the person, this can take several months to get them down to the frog. Okay?
This is neat.
Yeah, I haven't done this for a while.
Yeah.
I remember when I first did this, I was like, it was weird how awkward it was at first.
It's much easier when it's here.
Yeah. Well, that's what you
great.
you start there. Yeah, that's why you start there. No, and often the thing is, I just get the motion down, and then every week, once somebody gets the motion down, we move them closer and closer to here. And by the time they get to here, they have a good sense of how their pinky works, and that actually starts to bleed into their playing. Then after that, what I do is I have another thing. I just called it the bow contraction. My sister said I should call it the bow jellyfish. It's probably a better name, but it's this. Some of you may have seen this exercise. So this is practicing, and this is extraordinarily important, the contraction of the fingers. So when it comes in, again, this goes into when you are playing, when you're playing more complicated techniques, the contraction and mobility of the fingers is extraordinarily important. Now, I've talked about this a little bit before. This was my video on how to play eliminate shaky bow. And having, okay, we'll get to questions at the end. Eliminating shaky bow. And there is a kind of shock absorption of the weight at the frog that the fingers have to take care of. However, I believe that if you train this motion just by doing this with your fingers, that your fingers will start to take care of that automatically while you play. I do not believe in doing this at the frog. Now, sometimes you'll see a very subtle movement like this, but that kind of just happens naturally if you train your fingers to move together, all from the bottom knuckles here. Oh, sorry, I guess the base knuckles here. If you train the fingers to move together, that will happen naturally. And then, of course, there's a bunch of little motions. Of course, sometimes little aspects of string crossing, all of these things can take shape if your fingers can manipulate the bow like this while maintaining your bow hold. That's the other side of this. All of this is, of course, to mold the student to where they can never lose their bow hold. If you can do this and not lose your bow hold, then you know your bow hold. Now, the last thing I do with the bow hold gauntlet is colle, as the commenter mentioned here. So this is, of course, going to teach you particulars of how to control it. Because again, I can just wave my fingers around like this. There's no precision to that. However, to do this very clearly, that takes some very clear concentration on what I'm doing here. Okay? And those are the three things. And once somebody is able to do that, obviously it doesn't make them automatically a stellar violinist, but that is one of the first starts in making sure that that their bow hold and their sense of where their fingers are is secure, and that will, and sometimes we might revisit some of those. They might not need to, but that's where I start with that. Then the other side of things, okay, well, that's just the bow hold itself. All right. What's the other thing is the bow stroke. Now, I already talked about moving from the elbow. But the other side of this is, can you pull, and the goal is, again, we're starting, what are our goals from the beginning? My goal is to have every single one of my students have a beautiful sound. Now, sometimes a beautiful sound, not sometimes, but generally a beautiful sound in terms of teaching can be a bit relative. Somebody can have a greatly improved sound from where they were a year ago, And I will tell that person they have a beautiful sound. However, I know in terms of what I think a beautiful sound is for me is not where they're at. But that's not important. The important thing is that I am getting them to that point, ultimately. So in relation to that, I will tell them, yeah, you have a very nice sound today, very nice sound. So the start of all good sound quality comes from, can you pull a long bow from frog to tip using only the weight of the bow, okay? So we're just letting the bow sit on the string. And just pulling a very simple back and forth stroke, okay? A lot of people can't do that, okay? Either they try to hover the arm and then you end up with a lot of pouncing on the bow, or you end up with people, they try to press too hard. What I want is just to use the weight of the bow itself, because if there's any tension in your arm, that's where you start to hear the bouncing in the bow, okay? So this is one of the first ways we get tension out of someone's arm. And then they also teach them, okay, what do I have to do to keep the bow perfectly straight from one side to the other? Then you can start doing variations off of that, all right? You can start, one of the best things to do to help someone with straight bow is you can have them practicing long bow string crossings. Because here's the thing, people often, they can pull straight bow with no problem, long bow, but when they start crossing strings, they're not keeping the same level of the bow. And this makes them more aware of where their arm is going from string to string. And then from there, I add in other things. There's the exercise. These are all my preliminary exercises. Then the next thing you want to do is we practice, okay, how is the proper way to put weight into the bow? So how I teach that is we do the long bows, but we add what's called pronation. So pronation is just the rotation of a limb inward. And I've said this before, if you just do this and you keep this motion going, what will happen is the bow will press into the string. You don't have to actually have to squeeze the bow into the string. And that allows you to control the weight that's in the string from very close to the violin, which is much more reliable. And so we work on that because you also, again, the bow's weighted, heavier here, lighter here. You have to learn, okay, how do I put weight in each part of the bow in such a way to keep a consistent sound? Because obviously you have to be less here and more here, okay? Then we go through a series, and these are all open string exercises. We go through a series of exercises that relate to the, I go through a series of exercises which are called targeted bow division, which relates to the three aspects of sounding point, the three aspects of sound production, which is pressure, which we mentioned earlier, then bow speed, which is what you should mostly rely on for all aspects of sound quality for the most part, and then sounding point, which is where you put the bow in between the bridge and the fingerboard. And I have a series of exercises that force you to deal with those in different parts of the bow. And then when someone can do that, once they have, that's my whole open string set of exercises, then it's time to move on to actual, other books of bowing exercises. But all of those things, okay, so that's the setup process. All of those things are there to solidify and train in good habits in the bow arm, in the student, in a way that is pretty easily digestible. I know that sounds like a lot because I'm telling you something that I do with someone that often takes 6 months over in like 10 to 15 minutes. But that is something, especially with, the watchful eye of a teacher, making sure, okay, you're doing this wrong, you need to watch this and things like that. That really helps solidify, because again, our goal is to get them to having a stellar bow technique in 5 years or 10 years or whatever. Those are the grounding points, the foundational points of both physical understanding, so just the feeling that you have in your arm, and also mental understanding. So the student understands this is what each finger does, this is what the bow arm does, this is what this joint is supposed to do, this is what this joint's supposed to do, this is how my arm is supposed to sit. And it, like I said, it molds the student in the right direction. Okay, so that's the left hand. That is how I think about that, and that is how I believe as a teacher, even if you don't use that particular method, you should have an idea, okay, what do I have to do to mold the student? Now, when it comes to younger children, things, of course, are a little bit different. I don't do as much long bow stuff, that you can do that as well. But what I do, instead of doing this with young kids, first off, I do tend to start with this bow hold with the thumb here. You have to make sure the thumb stays on the tip, by the way, if you do that. if this is no good, because the whole point of this is that this is a big surface here, so they can get used to putting the thumb on the tip here, okay? And that makes it easy once they get used to that to move the thumb here. It's actually, once someone can do this, it's very easy to move it here. But if their thumb looks like this all the time, there's just no way that's going to work. So this is just an easier way to give them, a kid, an idea of how to do this. Sometimes also even adults at some points. Anyway, so when it comes to kids, how I work with this is I do want them to have the basic ideas of how to hold the bow and how to apply pressure and all that good stuff. So instead of having them do the bow teeter-totter, especially you can't do that, so the thumb's here, we just practice, okay, can you hold the bow like this? Just hold it, okay? We're just going to hold the bow, all right? That will put pressure on. Some kids, they can't do that. The thumb, their pinky falls off. Sometimes their pinky collapses. And so if that happens, some kids do it right away. If that happens, then we practice, okay, can we hold it just this far, all right? And maybe this far, and then we keep increasing it week by week while still playing music, because when the bow's sitting on the violin, then you don't have to worry about the pinky as much until they are able to do that, and then they have a pretty good secure strength to their bow hold. I also work with kids on not squeezing. That's one other thing. A kid is probably going to be a lot more natural of a player if they don't tend to automatically squeeze everything. A kid that just kind of has a very settled sense of their self and just lets the instrument sit instead of tightening up every time they touch something, then they'll probably be a lot easier, a lot quicker to pick up on things. So if somebody doesn't have a good sense of just, I can just let the bow sit here and it's not going to fall off, then we just practice holding it. And we just try to encourage them, okay, not squeeze. There's a student I've been working with where I've actually been having them do this. Took a long time before we could get him to hold the pinky without it falling off or collapsing while holding it to the side. So now we're practicing, okay, we'll hold the bow and we'll do that. Lift one finger, lift one finger, lift one finger. If you move the bow here, you can do that. Do that. So there you can get a little bit creative. Those, like I said, those are things that you do with specific students, like the finger exercise, that help them work with that. And then when it comes to the left hand, what I do with kids, of course, is we just work on just some basic things. We work on, if you're going through someone with Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, which is usually the first thing that you do with somebody, then that's a pretty good way to set someone up. So the first thing that I do, I don't teach fourth finger right away. First thing that I do is we just practice being able to go A, 1, 2, 3. And we practice, can the student do that while keeping their wrist in, okay? Because sometimes some kids keep their wrist and it's very nice. And other kids immediately, they touch the string and they do this. So sometimes you just have to practice doing that, all right? Because we want, ultimately, this motion here, okay? And once they can do that, and then, of course, you're also working with them on their bow arm stuff at the same time, because you're doing the, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, or especially the Suzuki variations, which is just a bunch of good practice for the bowing. And then you practice, okay, we got to learn to hold the fingers over the strings at all times. It just kind of more naturally flows into the, if you're careful, you can just, without much extra work on the student's part, just tell them, okay, keep your fingers hovering. That's why I tell them, hovering fingers. Okay, keep our fingers hovering. We don't let them fly off. We keep them here. And gentle encouragement as they're learning their music. They tend to learn it naturally. Now, there are a couple things that you definitely want to keep track of if you are teaching a young child. If you're teaching an adult, well, you're doing the same thing, but it's a little bit more direct. If you're teaching a kid, once they have a pretty good sense of their fingers here, and especially of keeping the fingers hovering, and they start using their fourth finger, you really need to teach them that when they pull the fingers, every time that when they're not using their fourth finger, it is not like this. This is the bane of all left hand and any rapid left hand technical technique. Okay, is if your fourth finger is curled up, or if you see this, I remember I've seen a lot of this. Okay, this is useless. This is useless, almost as useless. This is where you want it. Okay, when I'm not playing, my fourth finger is just here. It's hanging out like that. Okay, and that, it's very natural for kids when they start playing, when they play third finger, their fourth finger either does that or, God forbid, that. So one of the best things you can do is, after someone kind of gets a good idea, okay, they have good placement of their fingers, that you slowly start to teach them. And you can actually see me doing this a little bit in my hand frame video, which is how to fix 90% of your intonation problems. Working with the student on how to keep their pinky out while they play. And that's just something, again, if you have a long-term goal, which my goal is for the student to have really good left hand technique, then just because they're playing all the right notes right now, which a lot of kids can, if they're doing it with the thumb going in and out, that particular student I was working with, she actually was able to get her pinky out really quickly and play all of the notes of the piece. I still knew, okay, that's not good enough. I have to work with her on this because eventually that's going to become a problem. And that's something you have to watch out for, is you have to see things as like, they can play this piece with this technique now. You have to realize they're not going to be able to play that with that technique in 5 years. And then you are going to have to fix that at that point, or somebody else is. And so you have to pay attention to those things so you can slowly and hopefully painlessly develop that into their left hand. Now, that's when it comes to little kids. When it comes to older students, and it does not matter how long they've been playing, I give this to just about everyone. My absolute favorite book, Ševčík Opus 1. This is the most just hit you in the face hand development set of exercises that were ever written. Ševčík was an absolute maniac. He was just, if there was anyone who was just obsessive about hitting violin from every possible angle, it was him. And there's a lot of it that you have to use your discretion as a teacher, but there's a lot of it that you don't have to put someone through. But so much of it is extraordinarily useful in developing the positions in someone's left hand. So what I do with someone is, once an adult student, or I guess anyone over the age of 13, has basic left hand and right hand motions in play, I just start walking them through the first page of this book. The light's kind of getting in there, it's shiny material. The first page of Ševčík 1. And the first thing we do is just the first 3 measures, which is just a simple groups of fingers. Okay, and it does the same thing here. And then this is the one that everyone has the most problem with. This is where you want the pinky out here and not here. Anyway, that is a great way to just kind of sandblast someone's hand into proper positioning and left hand technique. It teaches it reveals so much about someone's left hand technique. It also can fix so much about someone's left hand technique. And sometimes people pick up on it really quickly. And then I have another student, you might be watching, if you are, you've been doing great, who, I kid you not, we spent 6 months doing those 3 exercises because his left hand had so many issues with it. And we got it fixed. But sometimes it takes that long, and you have to hopefully you have that patience, and of course your student has that patience. So once somebody is able to do that, so that sets up someone's hand frame, okay? And then there's a whole bunch of exercise, like different combinations of all of those notes and fingers that goes over the whole page, if you can see that there. And then there's all this stuff that combines all the fingers together, and then it just keeps going. Sometimes someone needs, and then there's other aspects of that as well. It's not just going through the exercises. Oh, yeah, he's watching. Hi. You did great. And then there's other aspects of it too. There's not just the intonation. There is, of course, the articulation. That's one of the other things. So you teach someone, the most important thing is that you put the fingers down in a simple and quick manner. So one of the things that is important to develop in a student is that not just, of course, they hit the note in the right place, but how the finger goes down. So there's something I call finger stability. If you touch the string and the finger wobbles a little bit after it's there, that is where you get that very unclear clear sound. Okay, that's what I call a mealy type of sound. This kind of wishy-washy sound between the fingers. And you actually don't have to do that sort of motion to make a clear sound. All you have to do is that you can actually move the finger as slowly as you want to the string, but right before it's about to hit the string, if it finds its place immediately, and you don't have to squeeze or hit it really hard, but if it finds the spot just immediately and stays there, then it's going to anyway, we'll get to that later. I should not be reading the comments. Anyway, and it stays there. That is where you get a very clear articulation. You can do that with very little fanfare. And so part of this is not just teaching the fingers their positions, but also teaching them how to move in the most efficient and simple manner. And it also helps people find, sometimes, I've talked about different people use different thumb positions. It helps them figure out what thumb position they want to use. It just, again, it's one of these things, you run someone through it, and it helps mold their left hand. Now, sometimes people need a little bit of other help with things. Sometimes I find that, for whatever reason, that might not be the best place to start. So Shradiak is also something I use with people as well. And one of the best things you can do with this, and actually you can do this with kids, sometimes it's a good test. If a kid can do this, and I've actually had them practice this, where they can figure out how to do like very light left-hand pizzicato, like that. And then you can have them practice that in Shradiak. I do this with a lot of my older students as well, but I've done that with some kid students, and the level to which it's improved their left hand action is immense. It's one of those things that, again, you should not underestimate. Once you get a kid kind of set up, you should not, and they're doing well, you should not underestimate what they can do. Okay, I had a student, the student I mentioned earlier is very natural, but we started doing some of those exercises as well, and the level that just within a month and a half that her left hand technique went up was just stunning. Okay, so those basically are the most basic. That's what I consider my foundation. All of that stuff that I just went through is my foundation for technique and setting someone up. And then as someone gets better at it, you can start to tell them, okay, remember this thing we did in this technical exercise? Okay, well, we're going to now, I want you to think about that when we're doing our pieces, because sometimes what they do in the technical exercise doesn't always, latch over into their pieces. And so you start to get them to mold those, and eventually you keep working on this, and they become a much more solid violinist. Now, the other side, of course, of things that a violinist needs to know from the beginning is what I call, under the heading of what I call general information, is first things like note reading, okay, rhythm, pitch, things like that. Now, some people come into it because they've either taken piano or they've taken some other music classes. They already have a sense of all those things, and it's a little bit easier if you don't have to teach that, of course, but most of the time you do. It doesn't really matter how you teach note reading. I have a book that I like to use that's just nice and simple, and it's published by Suzuki, so you can get it just about anywhere. And that's generally what I use. Some people, you don't even have to get through the entire book. Once they get a few things, you can just give them their music book, and they'll just start figuring stuff out from there. Other people, you do have to keep walking through the book. The most important thing that you want to do when you're doing note reading, I've discovered, is you probably almost need to pay attention more to rhythm than you do with just, okay, which dot corresponds to which note on which line or which space. Having an understanding of rhythm pretty right off the bat, even with some young, and again, if not always, but if a young student can do it, start working with them on the metronome. I have a 7-year-old that I realized that she was able to, so we started doing some basic metronome practice, learning how to play with the metronome. And yeah, she can do it now. Okay, it is something that you definitely want to. It's definitely something that, if you want to introduce as soon as possible. Introducing the idea of beats and subdivisions and things like that within what the student can do is extraordinarily important. At the very least, they should be able to clap and sing along with whatever piece they're doing. And then as for repertoire, for beginning repertoire, just because it's what I don't do the Suzuki method, but I grew up in it. And I actually think that the Suzuki books, if you know how to use them, are excellent in terms of the progression of repertoire, and they're very available to most people. So that's generally what I like to use for repertoire. Generally for someone starting out. So that's my basis. And the whole point of what you set someone up with is that it's something that can, once someone gets that good foundation, that you can turn into, then you have a little bit more of a linear path to getting them to be at an advanced level. And then after that, as you start growing them in those things, there are other things that I think it's very important to develop into someone as they start to get the basics down. You start introducing, of course, wrist motion. Something that I've done with a couple students is start introducing, actually, interestingly enough, up bow staccato. And the reason for that, and it's a simplified version, it's not a rapid type thing, but if you teach someone to be able to have the control to do this, that's actually a lot of control that it takes to do that simple motion. There's a lot of things that have to happen within the hand. There's a lot of things that have to happen within the hand, a lot of things that have to happen within the fingers, and especially has to happen within the wrist. And so I've introduced that to students, both young and old, and it's really helped develop things in their left hand and the wrist, and just help them with sort of general progression of their playing. Then, after that, once you get kind of those things into place, then it's just kind of generally you walk someone through a lot of the rest of the repertoire, and you start introducing other things as well, things like your other technical exercises. You have to introduce. Oh, and then of course there's other things. Of course, introducing things like double stops, and a lot of that stuff is just introduced via the repertoire that you're playing. So long as you get someone more or less kind of set up, okay, properly with a view to the future of who they're going to be and how they're going to play, and slowly guide them and think to that, okay, if I don't watch out for this thing here, then that's going to become a problem in the future. And you have to know what those things look like. That's really what it takes to, I think, set someone up in such a way that gets them to that high level later. And then once you have that kind of set up, then it sort of follows through after that. So now that's when it comes to starting someone. Again, this is somebody that you've been able to control from the very beginning, so to speak. Now, when it comes to working with somebody that comes to you from someone else, well, that becomes a little bit more difficult because you're working with bad habits and priors. And so that takes a lot more finesse, I feel, on the part of the teacher, because especially if somebody comes to you that is fairly advanced, even if they have a lot of issues in their playing, it's a little bit more difficult because you don't really want to, something you don't want to do is like just make them feel like they have to start over. Okay, because you don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to feel that way when it's like you just make them do open strings and scales all the time. So you have to kind of get a little bit more clever. Maybe I won't start someone like that with Sevchik, even though sometimes they might be willing to do that. I might, of course, everyone should be doing scales. So we'll just often get into doing scales. Maybe scales with double stops, things like that. And then introduce, if they're able to, there's actually a lot of ways in which you can get some basic technique, of course, which everyone should do, doing things through Kreutzer. Something I'm doing with the student right now.
Show them the book.
Something I'm doing with someone right now is I'm going Pinka Zuckerman mode, and we're walking through all of the different ways you can play Kreutzer number 2. Mm-hmm. And this is mostly for the development of their bow arm. There's definitely some things within their bow arm that they needed some work on. And I think it was Galamian who wrote all these out. There's a bunch of these different ways that you can play.
I think there are 2 versions on IMSLP. You'll want to look for one that has over 60 different bowings for 3 times the torture. The one with 20-something, the bowings aren't even as good as these.
Yeah, well, I mean, generally, if you get the book, I would suggest getting the Galamian edition generally. And so I'm working through that with him, and we're just kind of walking through all of these. And there's just, there's a lot of things to learn in terms of what we call bow division, which is, okay, how do I plan out which part of the bow I'm playing in, depending on the bowing as it goes across an entire piece of music, the way in which you distribute weight within the bow. And so these within certain sections or things like that. So these are ways in which that you can work with somebody that, again, maybe has a lot more experience. Maybe they are playing at a much higher level, and you don't just want to treat them like they've never played before. And then there are others. I have some students that are playing just a lot of advanced repertoire, and we're just kind of sticking with that. We decided instead, okay, we picked a piece of music that we're going to use to work on some bow stuff, and then we picked a concerto that we're going to play, and then we do a bunch of scales and double stops as well. So that person's mostly repertoire, but a lot of it is still very technique focused, and we're using the repertoire to help them with their technique. And so again, you can listen to what the student wants, you have a general idea of what you want to do, and then you can kind of get creative and work it out there while still maintaining sort of your principles. Anyway, that is the start.
Cool.
Of what I do with somebody. I figured that we wouldn't get through to the entire, direction of, okay, this is what I do this year, and then this is this, and then finally this, and then Brooke. But that is the foundation, and that is what I think is the most important part. We could probably do another series on this, sort of what we would do afterwards. I have all of my technique books here. Of course, other things, Don't, Schradiak, Wolfhart, Road, all of those things that are extraordinarily important. We might maybe get into later and some other live stream get into, okay, how does someone appropriately use those and at what point. But for now, I think that is probably the best start to this discussion. So it's mostly today, I guess we didn't get to the pro part right now. We're just talking about foundations. So the foundations, which is the most important part to making sure that somebody, when they get to playing advanced repertoire, can do it with not as many problems as often comes with that. So
we're going to hit the comment section really soon here. First, though, I have some follow-up questions for Tobiah. I wanted to ask a clarifying question. Let's say there's a parent listening who is not very skilled with music themselves. Perhaps they can't sing a tune. And they're worried their child is also that way, but they or their child are very interested in learning violin. Do you see that child, let's say if they're under 10 first, do you see that child learning Brooke Concerto with you before college?
Possibly. I mean, here's the question. How old? So you said they're under 10.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, a lot of that depends. It'd be hard to say for sure. Again, I'd have to spend a couple years with them to figure out.
Refining question. Would you highly recommend that parent absolutely sends their student to learn violin?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm assuming at this case,
if there's a genuine interest.
If there's a genuine interest, of course you should. If there's a genuine interest. If there's not a genuine interest in that case, then I would say no. I've met, because I also teach at a private school as well, and I have a few students where I've told their parents, I was like, listen, your kid is musically talented. You should think about putting them in violin, and they have. And I have a few of those. There are kids I'm just like, I would not. I mean, if the parent came to me and said, I want you to teach my kid violin, I would. But I wouldn't come to them and say, I really think you should have your kid play violin.
So you're judging by the student's own current enthusiasm level.
But if somebody really
alongside wants to, they're perhaps that they're not as, their ear isn't as talented up front. So of course, if their parent approaches you with that enthusiasm, that counts. That works.
I think so. If somebody has the enthusiasm, they see no reason why they should do it. Because again, even though I say my goal is to get someone to this level, I don't assume that everyone's going to be there, and I don't think anyone's a failure for not getting there. Okay, well, but I feel like as a teacher, you need to have that goal to start with. So this is how I'm going to treat every student. It doesn't matter if somebody gets there. I think they're going to get to the most they can get to if I approach things in this way.
And also, the point at which music truly becomes a joy of the musician to create, not just to be able to experience the feeling and the sound, but to really enjoy abstractly what we're doing. That happens way before Brooke Concerto. And it can happen for any student.
Well, as I've said many times, my main rule is there's only pleasure in excellence. There's no pleasure in mediocrity. However, What I mean by that is that whatever you do, your goal should be to do it as well as you possibly can.
Right.
I'm not saying that when I say that, I'm not saying that somebody that has not reached the top level has no pleasure. No, I'm saying that whatever you do, you should try to do it to the best of your ability.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and to me, that's the only way in which I find, at least personally, find joy in something. And it doesn't mean, and it doesn't mean that it has to be perfect. It means that whatever you're doing, you're trying to do it as well as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
nice.
That's what I would say.
You said midway through you were talking about moving only with the elbow.
Yes.
Using the forearm, as I call it. Can you go over that in detail, and knowing that, of course, at the frog, that doesn't apply?
Well, yeah. Okay, so I always start with somebody in the middle of the bow. Okay, always. So because that is where the elbow motion is going to be. It's also, the place where most people can start to make a decent sound is if they start here. If you try to start them here, well, it doesn't, unless they're extraordinarily gifted, they're just not going to make any sound. So this is the place where you can usually get someone to start. And again, you need people to hear themselves doing something well, so they have encouragement in what they're doing. So somebody can just start out and have a decent sound, just even if it's on open A, and they can move in a way that seems pretty obvious, even if they have trouble doing it at first. Then that's a much better place to start than then starting with long bows, which is something I will get to. Okay, so in any case. That obviously, yes. Once you hit about the balance point, the arm, this joint here, has to come up. Okay. However, I don't want the energy of the bow stroke to come from here, because once you get to this point, you can finish the rest of the bow with there, and there's a lot more control moving things from here than moving things from here. So that's generally my viewpoint on that. That's where I like to start. I think that's one of the most important aspects of playing, and of course, one also keeps the bow straight.
How much should the fingers move at the frog?
How much? Only as much as they need and no more, and that's usually the general rule of most things with violin.
Only as much as you need and no more.
Yes.
Well said. Could you demonstrate the 3 P's? Pressure, speed, and sounding point.
I really thought you were about to do that. Did you come up with that right now?
Just at this moment. That's why it's that bad. Go for it.
I really thought I was like, he's not. When you started out, I was like, he's not going to.
Yeah.
He's not going to go.
I thought there's got to be a way for me to make this 3 P's.
Okay. Well, obviously,
All
pressure involves things here. Mostly, by the way, if you think about doing pressure, this is often the.
I want to hear the sound of lots of pressure, medium pressure, low pressure.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yep.
Okay, we don't do that.
Yep.
Light pressure, literally no. What? That's actually just the weight of the bow itself. Okay, which is actually quite a bit.
Did you notice that created a beautiful, pure sound?
Well, that's why I start with
the bow itself creates all the sound we need 9 times out of 10.
Well, that's why I start with. I tell people, okay, when I start with someone doing long bows, I say, okay, the goal, the foundation of all good sound is the weight of the bow itself.
Yes.
Okay. And also, again, because you're not messing with the pressure one way or the other, you have to learn how to work with the bow. Okay. The bow, you have to work. You cannot force this to your will.
He's a true Franco-Belgian bow hold person to say that we must work with the bow. The Russian bow grip tends to have more control, direct control through the index finger. By unpronating, by supinating our hand, we allow the bow its own voice more.
Don't do that though. That's too supinated there. But.
Indeed.
But yeah, so you learn to work with the bow, and you have to learn to work with the bow.
Pressure, speed.
Okay, pressure. So if I do this, there's more pressure going into the bow, obviously.
Now speed.
Obviously, this is, and you don't. This is where you want to have most of your sound. Like that's where you want to have most of your sound.
You create a big sound through speed.
Obviously, you will be mixing that with pressure, and then the trick is learning exactly where to put the pressure, into the bow. But speed is actually your most important thing, and this is why you need to learn how to have a very clean and working with the bow. Because if you have any tension through here, speed is what's going to cause a lot of bouncing in your bow.
Can you show a slow speed as well?
Well, obviously slow speed. Oh, that's another important thing. Momentum. Okay. Everything in violin, especially the bow, needs to come from a place of momentum. If you want to be able to pull a super controlled long bow stroke, you want to be able to feel like the arm is moving itself. Okay, I'm just along for the ride. If you feel like I've got to control the bow, that's where you have problems.
Mm-hmm.
But if you feel like, okay, almost like you put blinders on, I'm just going to keep going. That's where control comes in, and especially both in fast and slow. Okay.
Can you give an elevator speech on sounding point?
Sounding point. Okay, so depending on what you're playing and depending on what you want to sound like, you're either going to be here. Well, hopefully not here unless you're playing sol tasto, or here.
Exactly. So demonstrate some tasto for us.
So tasto, this is an actual thing you'll see written in music. Sol, S-U-L, space tasto, T-A-S-T-O. Actually it means play on the fingerboard. So you get a very, very light thing, very light sort of. Yeah.
The violin is easiest to play over the fingerboard, and it creates the lamest sound.
Yeah, but if you're in an orchestra and you have a whole bunch of people doing this,
it is a special effect only. I have a bit of a bone to pick. Now, demonstrate the opposite.
Okay,
which is
so
ponticello.
Ponticello, okay. Now this is the fun one. This is where you actually play right on the bridge. So you'll see this in orchestra too. Well, actually, you'll see this in a lot of just solo music as well. A very metallic sound. That kind of thing. Actually, it's a thing people write music. So we don't usually want to do that unless we actually want to make that sound.
Another special effect.
Yeah.
Can you show me the ideal sounding point?
So I tend to think that now you have to have control over it because sometimes depending on which part of the violin you're playing in, you actually need to change it. That's why I do the sounding point exercises. But if most of the time I'd say middle, slightly towards the bridge. That's what I generally think is the best sound.
If you went any further, it would be ponticello. And that is why the sound is so excellent.
So also, though, if you really want to concentrate, you can actually make a non-ponticello sound right next to the bridge. See if I can. It's very difficult, but
try some speed too.
Now it's a very grainy sound, but it's not ponticello. So depending on how you're messing with your bow, you're the guy who's messed around with this the most.
A little bit, yeah.
So anyway,
yeah, we're always pushing boundaries, and so.
Now here's the other side of this. We are in a small living room with a microphone right in front of us,
mm-hmm.
And
so you hear all the grit.
So you hear all the grit and everything. Very often, in a concert hall, you can play that way, and you will not hear you will hear none of that. A lot of things the soloists play, they play in such a way in which it would actually sound really, really bad if you were standing right next to them. Okay, but there's an understanding of acoustics that you have to have, where a lot of that gets actually lost in the hall, as they say.
A lot of the bad stuff,
and leaving only just the power that comes from playing that.
There are other schools of playing with orchestra too, and we also enjoy the other schools, such as all the sound comes from the start of when the string starts ringing. So with a slightly less aggressive sounding point. Not quite there. We can still create a nice big sound because of the way we start the sound. And so there are multiple ways of doing it, but the sounding point gets better and better as you approach the bridge until it breaks. So we enjoy being daredevils, and we encourage you to be a daredevil too in trying out your sounding.
There's a lot of value, especially if you're well set up with your technique. There's a lot of value to experimentation.
Yeah.
So okay.
All right, I have one more question, and this is a personal question I kind of developed at the beginning.
Okay.
How much should our choice of repertoire challenge a student? We have, on the one hand, many people who are taught by, unfortunately, poor teachers Mendelssohn Concerto at a very young age before they're ready, or Bruch Concerto before they're ready, because that's considered the checkpoint for their success. And on the other hand, we could be tempted to always give our students pieces that are too easy for them.
That's a very excellent question, especially being someone who was playing Mendelssohn right way before I probably should have.
A lot of us did,
except that was actually me, because I was very stubborn.
Sometimes the students insist.
In a way, here's the thing.
In a way,
it was good, and ultimately it was good for me because it forced me. I learned so much from doing that because I was just like I wanted to learn it so bad. I was in Suzuki Book 7 or something like that. I was 12, and I was just like, I'm going to learn Mendelssohn Concerto, and I did. Now, granted, I'm sure if I found the recording of it, I would be like, oh man, this sounds bad. But if I hadn't have done that, I would not be where I am today. I would not have jumped. I jumped so many levels ahead of that. And then, a few years later, I was actually playing a lot more difficult repertoire at a much more high quality. So it depends. Like, here's what I'd say. You want to challenge someone. Okay, there's this level to where you get all your ducks in a row technically, but there comes a point in which you do have to push someone. Okay, you do have to stretch them out. And a lot of that will depend on the student. Like for me, again, my teacher did not say, oh, Tobias, I think you need to play Mendelssohn Concerto now. As a matter of fact, he's like, no. He was like, no, you're not going to play Mendelssohn. And I was like, okay, then I'll learn it by ear. So I learned the first part of the first page, the melody by ear. And I played it for my teacher. And he's like, wow, you played the right fingering. So he gave me his music, which he thought would discourage me after I saw the rest of it. And then I just went and learned it. And again, if you have a student that has that level of desire, then maybe there's a reason to do that, because it did push me forward. Even though there were a lot of things I had no idea how to do them, I just did them anyway, and didn't do them very well, but it still helped. Mm-hmm. But if you have a student who is just they don't have that level of passion, probably not the best idea.
I will give a complimentary story. I was learning Lalo Symphony Español, and I was doing some technique books alongside that. And my teacher signed me up for a local children's competition. And the competition was not for another 6 months. So I continued with Lalo first movement. After learning all 5 movements, I went back to the first movement instead of going on to a new piece. But I continued progressing with my technique books. And at the end of that competition, I stopped being challenged in the same way by new concertos. And it was the coolest feeling in the world, because my technique had continued to progress while I was seemingly stuck on this one piece, preparing it to an even greater level.
Like I said at the beginning, I do separate within the lessons the idea. I mean, they ultimately do, of course, help each other, but the idea, okay, there's the technique portion of the lesson, there's the repertoire portion of the lesson. Mm-hmm. And again, it's one of the most enjoyable things as a teacher. I've started to see this a lot more recently because I have quite a few more students that have been with me for at least a year or longer. And when you start to see things just kind of fall into place with somebody after you've been hammering them with technique things for a year or so, and you start to see it fall into place, that's where it really gets fun as a teacher. So is that all your questions, Brian?
That is.
All right.
Let's get to the comments.
Let's get to other people questions.
Iggy had a comment about Collet, which we answered in chat. And Iggy, if you're not satisfied with our answer, go ahead and re-ask it. We're going to Madison, who is an adult beginner, but she's been studying 5 years. So beginner only in some terms. Now, at the start of COVID, her lessons went virtual, and she developed some tension on the left side. Mm-hmm. So she would like us to, I recommended that we just teach a broad reset program.
Okay, so
for resetting the left hand.
Is it okay? So
left hand, arm, and this area here.
Okay, so is it
vice grip?
We don't know what.
We don't know, and so I also recommended a trial lesson for her.
Okay. Okay. Very nice. Oh yeah. By the way, you probably, if you're watching this channel, you know that we teach both in person and online, but mostly online. And so far, it's been very successful. I'm basically filled up, but Brian still has a lot of openings. So you should definitely send an email.
It would be my pleasure to teach you guys. And we have a policy of free trial lessons for everyone. They tend to last 45 minutes to an hour, and we have variable rates for 30-minute lessons, 45-minute lessons, hour-long lessons. The professional pace is hour-long lessons every week.
Depends on the students. Most of my students start at 45 minutes.
Yeah, and I have multiple students that are doing bi-weekly lessons instead of weekly. And the pace of progression will be just a little slower with a lesson every 2 weeks, but the student still feels that progress, and they're able to live life and learn violin on the side.
Okay, so we're going on to...
So let's see. Tension, left arm, left hand, wrist, and right side of the jaw.
Okay, interesting, interesting.
And it's developed during the pandemic, which is totally understandable. Yeah.
Well, one of the things is if you're having a lot of tension here, okay, right side of the jaw, I don't know what would do. I would just think
all
you're just
connected. My goodness,
I would just think everything's you're just
we only have one
very
body,
very
so.
tight. Yes,
Yeah.
very true. So what I would say is one of the things you can do is I would just spend a lot of time finding the place of your violin. Make sure it's in a place where you can do this. Okay, this. Okay, it's not going to fall off. Sometimes we just have to tell ourselves it's not going to fall off. Some people they freak out because they act like they feel like it's going to fall off. It's not going to fall off. You have it in the right place. It's not going to fall off. Okay, once this feels comfortable, and this is what I call being settled. Okay, you got to make sure this is settled. You're not raising
the violin rests
soldier
in the collarbone area without the chin being involved one bit.
Okay, and then you should just practice whatever your thumb position is, this or this.
Yeah.
Just practice, okay, with your chin off the violin. Just practice holding it, okay? Just practice, okay, getting comfortable here. Your fingers should be very loose, okay? You should not be squeezing here. You should just be sitting here. And then I would practice just tapping the fingers. Don't even push them down. Just tap them. This is by the way, this is what your finger action should look like. Okay, just literally what you would do if you were just tapping the strings and not pressing them down. That's what it should look like no matter what. So when I press the string down, first off, the string is, and that's what I tell people, how far away is the string from the fingerboard? It's not that far. You don't have to squeeze that hard. Okay, so there's not much difference between this and this. Okay, as you can see, there's a little bit more pressure I put there. So I would just start out just practicing, no playing with the bow, just practice getting comfortable with this. And then practice, okay, I'm gonna tap the finger, then I'm gonna push the string down and just, okay, only as far as I need to. And then you got your bow and test it. Okay, this feels like, okay, I think that's all I need. Oh, it made a sound. I've had people get shocked at how little they actually have to press the strings down. Okay, and then, and by the way, you do this with the chin up. Okay, so you just get comfortable with all this.
Yeah,
and then you can go to okay, start another one. All right, then okay, you can't practice everything that way though. It's good to be able to do some set check maybe without the chin up. You can do that, then you'll have a pretty good sense of what your hand is. I don't expect everyone to be able to do that, but it's
also,
not a bad idea to practice.
When you hold the violin with your hand, you don't need your chin for anything except.
I don't know about
Yeah. We're slightly different schools in this, but the one time I need my chin is when I'm shifting from X position to first. You see how I grip the violin to do that, or I use my chin for that brief moment of shifting. Everything else can theoretically be done without any chin involvement.
Some stabilization.
So right jaw tension, all of this here, stabilization helps absolutely.
Vibrato, like again, just
but it's not. Yeah, it's not strictly. It's not necessary. You see how my violin moves, so a little stabilization would help. Still no chin. Let's see, I'll shift down. So, theoretically, if you're looking for less tension, taking the chin off is the biggest step. Now,
even if you play with shoulder rest, by the way. That's actually one of the best ways if you want to reinvigorate if you play with shoulder rest, By the way, we're not anti-shoulder rest here. We just think it's
My
a
high
good
school
idea.
teacher Mimi was anti-shoulder rest. Very, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not I don't pull out the trash can like Pink Zuckerman apparently used to, like he'd go to master classes and he'd like pull out this bin and be like, okay, put your shoulder rest in. I don't do that. But no, I mean, like I have my issues. I think you can do it correctly. I think you can play with one correctly.
Mhm.
It's just one of the best ways to. Often it makes people's hands lazy. So one of the things you can do to avoid that is just you place the shoulder rest here. Okay, just play without the chin on. Do scales without the chin on, I guess going up, because in going down you do maybe need a little bit. And it'll force your hand to do things that you didn't realize it would do. So that would be my recommendation. And then the chin, again, you want to make sure your chin does this, okay?
Mhm.
Not this, okay?
Madison, I want to ask just a clarifying question directly to you that you can chat in the chat. Do you put your chin or your jaw anywhere on the violin, even without a chin rest? That's the question for you. We will go on to our next question, which is your associate.
I think that's you.
I know. Commented on the technique that I figured out at a very late time, like a year or two ago, that I wish I'd learned when I was younger, which is to base the first position around my fourth finger. It's very similar to what you're talking about, but Iggy saw that it might be a little different. What are your thoughts on my philosophy? Is it an opinion, or do you also subscribe to
I think
it?
that's as far as the general school of technique that we're associated with. I think that is generally good advice. I forget somebody I was working with the other day. I was telling them, I kept having to tell them two things. It was like elbow in front. You want to keep your elbow in front of the violin. You don't want it back here. And then rotate your hand. I was just telling them that constantly because he just has bad habit with this.
Yeah, and the big thing that I see a lot is when the fourth finger, as Tobias said, sometimes it's chilling, but even if it isn't chilling back there, it's not often ready to go when it needs to be. And if we rotate our hand from the start, then it's always ready to go.
Yeah. So again, and then here's the thing: it's often a very small motion, and it can become very comfortable. I tell people, you start with this, okay? And some people, we have larger hands. But if you have smaller hands, then you can learn to do this. All I have to do is this and then this. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a little elbow comes in front. The thumb goes slightly. I don't actually have to move the position of the thumb. It just comes slightly under.
Is this something you do every time you're preparing for a fourth finger?
I do it automatically. Yeah.
When you're preparing for a fourth finger.
Yeah.
Cool. And that's the subtle difference in our schools. It's totally fine. The main idea is that we're both prepared.
So basically, if I hear, and this is mostly, especially if I'm going to do like a strong note on a fourth finger, then I want the thumb underneath. Like again, that is literally all the motion I need.
Another advantage,
and then I can get a lot of
school
pressure here. And so the fourth fingers on the thumbs on the side, not a lot I can do. If I'm doing very quickly, I might just move that much. But
this worked for me very well, but I haven't taught it very often, and it's totally possible that for some people it will hurt, and we don't want violin playing to hurt for long periods. So
you do have to get a little more. Some people do have to realize that, especially if you're adult students, you have to get more
certainly.
flexible.
Yeah.
And sometimes the flexibility is
right.
here.
Right, indeed. But for Tobias' school, you're not always here. And if being here is exhausting, then maybe you don't always want to be here, especially at first. And that's totally fine. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a fan of pivoting.
Okay. Third question. Do we subscribe generally to learning skills roughly first? For instance, like the beginner's bow hold of putting the thumb here and then transferring it here, or I suppose the opposite, which would be a better approach, would be to just teach them honestly. This reminds me of do you tell your children that Santa's real?
I don't know if that's really a good comparison.
No, it's not violin related, so we'll keep that out. But where do you draw the line in things that are easier to learn right now, but totally different from what you'll be doing?
Everything I teach can and will be extrapolated into more advanced versions of that technique, or or just maybe not even version, but or just doing it the way I teach it, but just at a higher level. Okay, again, there is a point to having the student have their thumb on the outside of the bow. It's to teach them how to, it's to help them, keep the tip on, the tip of the thumb on the bow, and then that's very easily translated into the actual proper bow hold. So, I guess in a way, yes, you do have to accept some roughness, but you don't do it. You don't accept things being necessarily wrong. Okay, so a lot of people I do collate with get to a point where I realize we've done what we can do with this person on collate for now, and I probably will revisit collate with him in a few years, maybe when we can enhance it even more. But there comes a point where it's within relation to where the student is at. It's like you've gotten what you can get out of it. You don't want to make them feel like they're going to be stuck on something forever, and so you recognize, okay, yeah, it's not perfect. We're not trying to get every little thing perfect before we go on. We're trying to build a foundation here. And as we go on, more and more will be added to that. And sometimes we might revisit things. And yeah, that's the approach I take. So nothing I do is, I'm not trying to get people to do it roughly. I'm trying to get them to do it as well as they possibly can in that moment for the maximal benefit of that particular moment with the view of what they're going to do later. And some things might need to be revisited. Some things maybe not. But everything is, still for that purpose. So that would be mine.
Nice.
Ryan, do you teach the Russian bow hold?
I do not officially know the Russian bow hold. I've extrapolated it, but I never had any Russian bow hold teachers. So if someone comes in with previous education from a Russian instructor or someone who themselves study the Russian bow hold, and it's passed on to the student, I would love to see that because I think it's really cool. And it's cool how they existed together. Some of it was also geopolitical, but it's totally legitimate bow hold, and I would not endeavor to convince someone out of it unless they're doing it badly.
I actually have a student that insists on using the bow hold. Mm-hmm. Russian bow hold.
I would,
and so my thing is I'm not. Mm-hmm. I'm a very a very serious teacher. I want to say I'm not a hardline teacher because my students might disagree with that. I'm very strict about things. But again, if somebody says, okay, I really like to hold the bow like this, mm-hmm. Okay, we work with that. I know enough about the bow, and I actually have a few books. Like I have just to educate myself. I have ours, some of his method books and things mm-hmm. like that. I've read his book on violin playing, and he didn't write much, but trying to give a sense of how this is supposed to work. And so we just kind of went through it, and so that person is using it, and they're actually coming along just fine with it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's the same kind of thing. If somebody, because you obviously can play this way, obviously. So it doesn't make as much sense to me. I know everything about this. I know exactly, I can explain this. Mm-hmm. I can tell you why we do all of the things we do with this. Mm-hmm. I can't do that with this. I can kind of give you a rundown from stuff I've read, but I don't have experiential knowledge. So if somebody is already using it, I can still use basic principles of violin playing to help them out. Yeah. But that's it.
And it would be a cool mutual learning experience mm-hmm. for someone to come in with.
Okay. So Madison here also says that
basically she does put her chin or jaw on the instrument without a chin rest. So
without a chin rest, I would recommend actually using. We're not Baroque gang here.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I mean, my idealist technique can absolutely be used for Baroque playing, where the chin is simply not involved. However, chin rests are in a totally different category from shoulder rests. Even though we're not anti-shoulder rests, we're not pro-shoulder rest. Chin rest, we're absolutely pro-chin rest. The problem with chin rests is that they're on the wrong side of the instrument, like literally the wrong side of the instrument. It teaches people to play like this, which Tobiah already mentioned exposes this. And that's just a symptom, really, to show that the violin is too far down. If the violin would fall without padding and like glue, then you're doing something wrong. So if we put the violin here, our chin would naturally come to the right side of the violin. And for that solution, I use an over chin rest here. Also, my high school teacher, Mimi, had a lot of her students use high chin rests because we don't necessarily want our head to come down. That creates super unnecessary tension. So chin rests are great, and we highly recommend them, and we both use the chin rests that go over the tailpiece here. So
get a center or something.
Right, at least a center. And so we can have that connection for our jaw.
Yeah.
Next. Iggy asks, is it okay to be like Perlman?
I made an entire video about this, guys. Or person.
That's fine. That's fine. We'll answer it here too. So I'll give my answer first, which might have some separate things from his video. But I've observed 2 big schools in professional violin playing, and I have not observed Perlman's thumb specifically, but I can see what you mean. So the 2 big schools are the knuckle thumb school and the palm knuckle thumb school. That's great official scientific terms, by the way, nomenclature. So this is what I do, where the big center knuckle of the thumb is your anchor. And for me, it's also the index finger right above this bone here that connects the index finger to the palm. Okay, so I have a triangle of support here. The knuckle, big thumb knuckle, is supporting it for me. I have seen many professionals support their left hand with this part of their thumb, the base that connects it to the palm. And then your thumb is naturally high. And I suspect that Perlman subscribes to that.
Yeah. Also, Perlman has giant hands. But the other side of this is, I made this video. It's one of my more popular ones. It's just called the high thumb position. So kind of having the thumb up like that. Now, from what I've deduced, there is a couple things. There's setting the thumb more or less here. And then there's the other side of this, which is where, again, just like the where the thumb, because the whole idea is there's 2 aspects of the thumb position. There's its relationship to this side of the hand right here, where this side of the hand touches the violin. So if the thumb is on this side, which is generally what I use right here, there's a relationship right here. It's I don't want to say pinching, but it holds right here. Okay. Now the other side the same thing happens over here, except it's more of instead of pin right across, it's more of this rotation here that holds everything in place. Okay. And in this case, the thumb can move around. So if you watch some old videos, you will see a lot of the old players use the higher thumb position. Their thumb is going all over the place. And this also gives them the option to pivot to where the thumb, except it's this bone here instead of the pad here, can push up this way into the neck,
right.
So it helps them to in which it can help them to leverage their fingers onto the fingerboard.
That is the key. Why is the thumb important at all? The thumb can lead our shifts to make us more accurate, so our whole hand feels at home. And more importantly, the thumb is a counterweight to our fingers.
So the
thumb creates all of the weight that we think our fingers need to press the string down to the fingerboard. The thumb creates that, and the fingers can go along with the ride.
So what is it? My general default is this. Some of my students naturally do this, and if that's something you naturally do, so long as you aren't doing this, okay, do not set the violin in web of your hand. This is just no good, okay? There's no leveraging there. But it almost sometimes will look that someone is doing that. So some people naturally have a tendency for the thumb to be up high. There's a really great series of videos by Rodney Friend, who's former concertmaster of both New York Phil and the London Phil. And he wrote this book called Playing the Violin in Fits. And he has a talk about this. And he doesn't talk about the thumb position like this, even though he plays like that. But he actually has this position of where the hand is actually slightly bent, and not like this, but there's what he calls a relaxed wrist. And it's this very beautiful way of playing. I think, again, you want to be trained in that from pretty early on. But if you want some different ideas on how to approach the left hand, that is one of them, one of the ones to figure out. But again, some people just naturally, their hand just fits that. And if that fits you, then that's what you should do. And I would still recommend you practice set check doing that. And it will help whatever way your hand works. It'll help figure that out. All right. Yes.
Are there any benefits to having a high elbow to create more pressure on the bow, like Heifetz, or does it just create shoulder tension?
Again, I do not know the ins and outs of the Russian school of bowing. I am not a big fan. I believe that generally the way I teach, the elbow should remain below the wrist. It doesn't have to be like this, but even if it's like this, where it's mostly a straight line, even if it's a straight line, the elbow should be below the wrist. Okay. What I believe is that everything should be what I call settled. Everything just kind of sits very nicely here. Okay. And then this makes it so you have the least amount of motion that you actually have to do. Okay. There's extra motion, again, even if it worked and somebody can explain the ins and outs of it and teach someone to it. What I know and what I've experienced is that this approach where everything just kind of sits very nicely and I think fits the body the best, that's the way you want to go. So,
I wanted to input that at the frog, I like to think of the elbow coming along and leading the hand. Not that it ever raises above the hand one bit, but as I reach the frog, I think of my elbow as being level with my hand, even though as you can see, it's totally not as high as the hand. I think of it that way because then I can create a pendulum of sorts. It's as if my hand is like this. At the frog, when I discovered this a few years ago, it made the frog my favorite place to be because there's a new type of gravity weight influencing the frog form. Now, as I go, you'll see my elbows quite low. I don't subscribe to any of this. It creates a tremendous amount of shoulder tension. Heifetz had a glorious, illustrious career, and he also had shoulder surgery when late in life and never fully recovered violinistically. So, if you want to be like a football player and risk whole body for the art, we are not in that business.
Yeah, and also when it comes to the pressure on the bow, actually the idea, at least for what I've read, again, not experientially, but what I've read about the Russian bow hold, it wasn't actually designed it was actually designed to use not as much wood pressure on the bow. The whole idea was that you just keep naturally more contact, and so you didn't actually have to put as much pressure, hypothetically, as you would with Franco-Belgian. As I explained earlier, I can literally put all the pressure possible by doing this. I don't need that. I can't put any more pressure. Okay, so I don't think the advantages come in for that side of things. Yeah, so that's that. Again, I ascribe to the same thing. What I tell people is like, I actually want there to be, when you're at the frog, I want there to be roughly a straight line from knuckles to elbow with the elbow pointing down, and you maybe bend the wrist a little bit to keep the bow straight. This is a nice relaxed position to be in. This is not. Okay, and Heifetz I don't even think look like this. The frog is much, again, because if the hand is more like this, there's still a little bit of bend here. Okay, there's still a little bit of bend here where the elbow can sit a little bit below the wrist. So,
all right, we'll stay on for a minute or so to see if anybody has more questions. And once the questions are finished, we'll call it a day.
We'll call it a night. Oh, so 10. Let's just count off 10. Okay. All right. The high elbow is part of the way. The elbow is part of MC arm weight. I would need that to be explained a little bit in more detail. Because as far as I'm concerned, arm weight is less of a factor than someone should think. The arm weight, because again, if you actually literally put the entire arm weight into the bow, you just scratch the bow. You scratch the sound. So the idea is that you want to have the arm in such a way in which, again, what I call settled. Okay, what I call the idea is that you want to actually have the arm in such a place where the arm weight doesn't become as much as a factor and it can stay loose. So again, you can control everything where it's close to the violin. Okay, so what you want is to control all of the aspects of the bow arm from the part of them that is closest to the violin.
No problem.
Okay. In any case, what I want here is I want the student to feel like this is just sitting here, and then they can just control the weight of they can just move like this, opening and closing the arm, just from here, and just maybe a little bit from here when they get close to the frog. And then they can just control the weight here, they control the weight here. All those things just happen right next close to the violin. And the arm weight is just there to be there, and you don't want to worry about your arm weight, okay? Because that usually ends up lifting from here or here, and that is very difficult to control. Okay, so that's why everything being settled and being controlled from the joints that are as close to the violin as possible, that's what you want. All right, well, unless we get another question within the next 5 seconds, I think we're going to call it a night.
It's been a pleasure, sir.
As always. All right, well, as usual, there's no pleasure in mediocrity, everybody. Happy practicing, and we'll see you next time.